In the following presentation, Dr. Karen Liu, assistant professor at the School of Arts and Social Sciences at the Open University of Hong Kong, discusses the implementation of the sustainable fisheries policy in mainland China in recent decades. Using a sustainable livelihood framework, she explains how the livelihoods of local fishermen in a traditional fishing village are affected by the government's regulatory measures, and how such impacts may actually undermine the sustainable development of fisheries in the region.
So, as a start, I would like to first briefly introduce the current fishing situations in China, especially the capture fishings. So we all know that China is large countries that rely heavily on fishing and also contribute a lot in terms of providing their supplies. And here is a map that shows the marine catch as well as the maricultural productions. And if we take a look, we'll find that in the past decades, the marine catch has stagnated, almost stagnated, because of different reasons, overfishing, pollution, as well as the policy controls in mainland China. They start to adopt a policy that we call zero growth or negative growth. But mariculture, on the other hand, is keep rising to keep providing us the food supplies. So it's important to understand the sustainable fishery policies, especially its implementations in China, because it's not just help us to achieve a more sustainable way of fishing, but as well as to help us to face the environmental problems, the overfishing problems, as well as the food supply, which is also a huge challenge in terms of considering that fish provide a large proportion of protein to human beings. So this is a very important issue. And China began to realize their problems that in their oceans, the overfishing issue. So that's why since the 1990s, they started to adopt a more sustainable way to manage this practice. They start to change their policies to try to boost agriculture and also put a lot of regulations on the capture fishings. So my study is an empirical case studies from a fishing village in the South China Seas that I'm going to explore the fishers' livelihoods, how they were affected by the introduction of the sustainable fishery policies in China. I'm going to use a framework that is called Sustainable Livelihood Frameworks. It's a very useful, although a bit complicated framework that help us to find a more practical aspects to address the sustainability issues. This is the framework that I'm going to use, and I would like to explain it briefly. Sustainable livelihood framework is a people-centered, multi-perspective framework. So it starts from livelihood strategies. In rural area or suburban area, actually people will have much more diverse ways to sustain their livelihood. Apart from have seasonal jobs, they may rely on primary industries like fishing or farming, and they may start some small business if it's a tourism destinations. So we may have different livelihood strategies, but they all be conducted for pursuing this kind of outcomes. To get more income is just one reason. More important, maybe increase the well-being and also try to make sustainable use of natural resource. But how to achieve these things is that they need to rely on different resources or what we call capital. These frameworks will analyze people's different livelihood strategies, and for each strategies or each livelihood activities, what kind of resource they will use, not just their financial capitals, but also the human capitals, natural capitals, physical capitals in terms of the tools that they use or some of the physical settings that they need for conducting their livelihood activities. And also social capital is very important for them to get support from the communities, their social networks. And these different types of capitals, their assets are actually determined by the different process and structures. For example, we have different institutions that influence different group of people's access to certain type of capitals. And also we have different levels of governments that will influence the allocations of different type of resource. And also culture will play its role in terms of how to distribute the resource, whether will favor some group or some behaviors. Here, policy also play a very important role. We know that policy usually is the top levels things that it will need to be delivered through different process so as to the front lines and to affect the resource allocations. However, the linkage between policies and their frontline livelihood impact is seldom explored. So we usually will know that, okay, there is some new policy, maybe land policies or, for this case, fishing policies that come out. And then people's livelihood change, fishers' livelihood change somehow, but we don't know what's the process caused these changes, what roles that played by different organizations that help to or eventually lead to this kind of outcomes. So that's why I would like to focus on the micro and macro level linkage to understand how sustainable livelihoods could be achieved. In the case in China's, its fishing industries or its way that the governments manage fishings has been studied a lot at the macro levels. We're talking about policies, talking about South China Sea's conflicts, and fishermen's livelihoods has been affected, but without much empirical studies. It's just taken from a very broad perspective to analyze. So actually what happened at the front line is something that I'm more interested in. And this is also something that I'm going to share based on our case studies, how fishers' livelihood has gradually been changed. So now I would like to introduce about the case that I'm going to study. That is Wailingding, Oilingding. That is a fishing islands very close to Hong Kong, but actually under the jurisdiction of Zhuhai. And why I choose this one is because it's located in the Wanshan district. Wanshan fishing ground is one of the 4 famous fishing grounds in China. It also contributes to a lot of fishing supplies to the countries as well as overseas. But on the other hand, this place also started to develop tourism. It's also a very popular domestic tourism destinations in the South China regions. So it's mainly a qualitative research using the participant observations, semi-structured and unstructured interviews. So this is the case that I'm going to present. First, I would like to introduce a bit more about the sustainable fishery policy. Actually, what is Chinese government want to do when they want to promote sustainable fishing. As I said, back in the 1990s, Chinese government already realized that they need to do some things. That's why they started to amend the fishery laws so as to add some items like they need to enforce the licensing systems. And they also introduced a series of other regulations in the past 2 decades so as to make sure that the fishing activities can be better monitored and controlled. So here's the tables that include different measures that the Chinese government have been taken. So for example, they have controls on the input. They have their licensing systems. This is a system that they can use to monitor all those activities of the fishing vessels. They have a vessel buyback programs and the dual controls. That is a program that help them to get the outdated model out of the market. They will buy the outdated vessels back and then destroy it. So that's a way that to reduce air pollution as well as the gasoline pollutions. They have output control as well. That is, for example, the program that I said is the zero or negative growth target, that they don't allow the marine capturing fishery to grow. And also they have the seasonal moratoriums that usually in their summers in South China Sea will have a several months that they will not allow fishers to go out for fishings. So this is some of the output controls. They also have the technical instruments like what size of the mesh you shall minimum have, and also bans on the destructive way of fishings, such as using bombs or using electricity ways to collect the fish. So they have some economic instruments. They have two strategies. One is to collect resource fees. If you use their marine resource, you need to pay. But on the other hand, they actually try to control is the onshore fishings. So for the offshore fishing or the marine culture, that is something that they encourage. So they will provide subsidies if you want to maybe upgrade your fishing vessels so as to go further to explore the oceans. So they have a lot of measures that related to the sustainable fishery policies that has been promoted by the Chinese government in the past decades. However, whether these measures effectively deliver at the front line can actually help the fishers. This is something that I'm going to explore in my case. In this case, taking the fishing sector as an example, we'll find that when the central government make their policies, how it can be delivered to the front line actually need to go through what we call multi-level administrations. That's common for multi-level, but what's not so common is something what we call dual leaderships. On the left side, we have the governments at different administrative level, from the provincial level, municipal level, all the level down to the township levels. But on the other hand, we have what we call functional departments or functional authorities. In this case, the fishery management will be responsible by the Ministry of Agriculture, and it has at different administrative level, it also has its functional departments that mainly responsible for monitoring the fishing activities, for providing different kind of support, but as well as they will do their punishments if you violate the law. So, for example, in the case, the Dangan Fishery Station shall be responsible for promoting and implementing those related policies and regulations. So it received orders and reported to its upper level functional departments, that is at the Zhuhai cities. However, on the other hand, they still need to report it to the same level, town governments, because town government need to also monitor the development on different sectors, not just on fishery and tourism and agriculture and business as well. So in many activities in mainland China, you'll find that the administrative right is not so clear because of this dual leadership systems. So on the one hand, we have the functional department that are supposed to be responsible to control these things, but they have two bosses. They report it to the same level town governments or the municipal government, and they have upper level administrative level supervisors that is from their sector as well. So that is what we call dual leadership. That will make the implementations of the policy become very complicated and also bring a lot of discretionary in terms of how to implement it. This actually will lead to a very common situation, a selective manner. Because you've got two bosses, you take orders from different sides, and sometimes orders from two sides are not consistent with each other. So what would you do? Maybe you just think that, okay, I don't do anything or do less. It will be blamed by one, but it will be supported by the others. As I said, that the new fishery law and a series of programs has actually been introduced in the early 2000s. But it's not until 2009 that the town government started to strictly implement all those regulations and laws. The main reason is because the town government started to realize that while tourism is maybe a much better options for developing the island as well as contributing to the GDP. So they started to think that fishery is standing in the way for tourism development. So they started to strictly enforce those regulations and push their fishery stations at the township level to go out to do the monitoring more often and to deliver more fine bills to those illegal fishing vessels and fishing vessel owners. So as I said, this place is a traditional fishing village. So the livelihood impacts in this transition period is definitely obvious. But tourism is not something new. This traditional fishing village has its tourism development back in the 1990s because it's very close to Hong Kong. And before the handover, it's very convenient for Hong Kong residents to take a ferry to the island directly from Hong Kong, but of course illegally. Those ferry these were very popular trips back in the 1990s. But at that time, most of the Hong Kong visitors do not visit it because of the sceneries or because of the natural resource of that island. They mainly visit there for shopping, for the cheap exchange rates, so that they could spend a weekend there. So at that time, there was not so clear conflicts between the tourism and the fishing industries. And the tourism declined after the handover of Hong Kong to China's, and this kind of illegal visit has already been stopped. So now they are targeting domestic tourists from mainland China's, and the attractions will shift to the natural resource, the beach, all those beautiful environments. So tourism began to revive in 2005, and the government began to realize that tourism is seems to be a better options for developing this area. So that's why they start to enforce their sustainable fishery policies more strictly. But during this process, the government still provide some incentives for the local fishers to try to change their livelihood activity from fishing to tourism-related ones. But when they do this, provide these incentives, when they allocated different resources to their local residents to help them to change their livelihood activity, they follow the OUHK system. That is the main system that used by China to allocate different type of resources as well as social services. And in this case, we have three groups of people that with different OUHK status. One is the local fisher. They are the native residents who has been conducted fishing for a long history. The second group is migrant fishers, but they came at an earlier stage, and they can eventually settle down by earning a OUHK in that town so that they become legalized citizens in Zhuhai. The third group is migrants that without OUHKs. They are migrant fishers that come from different provinces that they earn a living in South China Seas. So here is the tables that based on my fieldwork to identify what kind of measures have been taken by the government to initiate this change to help fishers to adopt alternative livelihood, like to get involved in tourism, and whether different group of residents, they can successfully change into doing something else to sustain their life. We'll find out that the first column is actually local residents. You'll find that they will have much more support in different ways. For example, they started to strengthen the licensing systems. So who will be mostly affected by this kind of activities? They are the migrants, fishers without OUHK, because usually it's this group of people that conducting illegal fishing activities. Their fishing vessels will be more likely to be confiscated. They will be receive penalties from the governments more frequently. Seasonal moratoriums actually affect all group of fishers. But for local fishers, the government provided financial support to help them to overcome these things. For example, they will have fuel subsidies or the subventions that is help the fishers because they cannot go out to fishing for several months, so they can receive subventions from the government. But only local fishers, as well as those with OUHKs, can receive the monies from the governments. And if you want to do marine cultures, You can also have quite a lot of support from the governments. You can receive trainings or some technical support to help you to set up the facilities that needed for marine cultures. That will enhance your human capital. You can get a wave of using the sea area for doing marine cultures. That will help you to have a better access to the natural capitals. You'll receive a direct funding support, a startup, the marine culture as well. If you want to change your livelihood activity to do some tourism-related things, you can also get support, but mainly from the financial aspects. You can have small amount of startup grant to allow you to start your small business. And what's more important is the recommendations for tourism developments. This will exclusively benefit local fishers only, because during the reclaimment process, the government also need to claim or need to purchase some of the lands from the local community. So that's why they have a deal that once the area has been reclaimed, then the local community can own part of the properties that are constructed by the town government. So that if you were local fishers, you actually during this transaction period, although your original way of sustaining your livelihoods has been threatened, but you have some other things that will help you to gradually move on and adopt other activities to continue to sustain your livings. However, priority will be given to the native residents. They will have more access to the subsidies, waters, or other resources for running different type of activities. What this will result is that they will have a more diverse, more secure livelihood activities in this case. But whether these transitions and the way that the government do will actually help to increase the sustainability of the regions, it actually can be interpreted from different aspects. If we consider the sustainability of the fisheries, we can easily understand that when they strengthen the regulations, the fishery sustainability will be increased because the illegal fishing activities will be reduced. However, whether this could be a long-term sustainable development of fishery is of great doubt. The main reason is that, as I explained, the governments in mainland China, they actually have a very complicated administration structures. So making the authorities at the front line have a very high level in terms of making discretionary decisions. And in this case, the township government actually can make the decision in terms of whether, when, and to what extent they shall interfere the implementation of the sustainable fishery policies. So it's actually the frontline government that making the final calls, even though the central government may have a very well plan. So without a sound and rule-based legal system that could help us to reduce the influence from the administrative structure or some key persons in the governments, whether we can have sustainable fisheries in the long term is of great doubt. So whether livelihoods can be sustained is another issue. While the government and the conservation groups may pay more attention on the sustainability of fisheries, but for local people, their priority will be always on livelihood. Because of the influence of the OUHK system, we'll find that even you are all currently staying in the community as residents, but you have very different livelihood impacts. Some of them, if you are local, if you have the OUHK, you'll have much better resources so that you will have a more secure livelihood, more sustainable as well. But if you are local, you will have better access to different resources and as well as to develop a better relationship with the town government. However, if you are migrant fishers, it will bring you huge threats. Without institutional support, they will seek for other options, which turn out to be a new threat to the area as well. This is one of the excerpts from the interviewee who conducted illegal fishing. What he said is that while the government started to strengthen the enforcement, that will make me go to other places to continue to do illegal fishings because I still have to make a living. And not all the governments in the South China Seas will do the same things at the same time. So there are always some places that the law enforcement is lax, so I will just flee away to other places. So if the migrant fishers do not have another way to continue to make a living, they will still continue to do what they used to do. That is to continue to bring the illegal fishing issues to other regions only. And if the nearby areas, its local government do not strengthen its regulations at the same time, then the problems will not be solved. The overfishing issue will continue to be a very serious issue, and the supplies of the fishing resource will continue to decline. So what's more important is that the government need to provide support not just to favor certain groups, but also to make sure that for those migrants, we need to find a way to help them to adopt alternative livelihood activities. So without their livelihoods to be sustained, it's difficult to assure the sustainability of the fishing. And also the tourism sustainability can be achieved by the sustainable use of the marine resource, but also it can be achieved through sustainable livelihoods of local people. So a livelihood perspective will be a much more useful perspective to help us to see the problems and try to tackle the problems, because we may be easier to find out that what are the difficulties to implement some of the very good policies, why it cannot be turn out to be a very good outcomes at the frontline levels. And whether tourism can help, in this case, yes, can help to a certain extent. But what's more important is that we also see that some administrative constraints because of the administrative settings that make the implementation of sustainable fishery policy to be very difficult, and as well as favoring some group of residents, so that also generate conflicts between the local residents, which is not good for the sustainable development of tourism as well as the fishing industry. So maybe we can think that instead of talking about policies when it comes to the lower and administrative level, what's more important to local people is their livelihoods. And in this case, the sustainable of livelihood is closely linked with the sustainability of fishery as well as tourism. So that's my presentations and my sharing. Thank you very much.